Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast, sponsored by Darla Cashin of RBC Wealth Management. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week we talk with Sarah Nathan, a new Twin Cities resident and world-class foodie. We talk about her work in the food industry, how she's connected with Judaism wherever she's lived, and an event later this week she's taking part in with YALA Twin Cities on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Sarah Nathan, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lonnie.
So you are a recent addition to the Twin Cities. You just moved here from Brooklyn. I guess for starters, tell me a little bit about what it was that brought you here from New York.
Yeah, absolutely. Believe it or not, I decided to move to the Twin Cities in November, midwinter.
Okay, wait. To be fair, that's not really midwinter yet.
Okay, well, I'm originally from California, so holidays is our midwinter. So I unfortunately lost my job last year, actually pre-COVID, a month before COVID.
That's unfortunate timing.
Yeah, it was poor timing. But, everything always works out for the best in some ways. And, I got an awesome opportunity to travel to India through JDC, the Joint Distribution Coalition. If you're familiar, it was a young adult Jewish trip. And then I came back and basically COVID hit New York. So it was definitely a very daunting, scary experience. I was living in Brooklyn in a one-bedroom apartment. Thank God I didn't have roommates and it was just me to contend with during this time. But, I think when the world shuts down, when everything shuts down, we had so little information. And you're in a one-bedroom apartment, you're paying crazy amounts, and not having a job, not having income, not being able to go to Broadway shows, not even being able to go on the subway. It just kind of makes you reevaluate what's important, what you're looking for. I wanted that backyard. I wanted the nature. I knew that this was going to last a while, and maybe my time in New York was sunsetting for the time being. It gave me a lot. I had an amazing experience there. I lived in Brooklyn. I've lived in the Mission in San Francisco. I've lived in the heart of LA. So I've really done the big city thing. Okay. I had never been to the Midwest previous. I've been to maybe Chicago for like a weekend in the spring, and knew nothing of this, but a really amazing job opportunity came up after being unemployed for about 6 months. And it was a great opportunity that was going to really stretch my career goals and really help me learn a lot. It was taking kind of everything I've done in the past and bringing it to another level. When I started doing the research and starting asking people about Minneapolis and about Minnesota, I heard nothing but great things. In my mind, it was all I could picture was Siberia, cold, like nothing came to mind when someone said the Twin Cities. And then the more I looked into it, the more excited I really became.
It is a really great place, and it's always important to remember that winter does not last forever. I know these last week or two, it definitely feels like it's going to last forever, but it's not really going to.
Yeah. In terms of what's going to last forever is now all very...
That's fair. That's fair, given what these last 11 months have been like.
Exactly. So to me, I feel like I can see an end to winter much quicker than I can see an end to everything else, but it truly doesn't bother me. And, in New York, winter is kind of gross. It snows, and then a second later, it's dirty. It's it's slushy. It's not what you imagine. And here it snows and it is white and romantic and lovely. And maybe I won't be saying this next winter, but for quite a while I took up. I've been very lucky. I'm staying in a friend's condo on Lake Harriet. So I'm like looking out the window and there's the lake. It's everything I had said I, wanted and imagined. And I've gone ice skating on the lake. I've gone snowshoeing at the Arboretum. I'm really like embracing this new experience.
So you're really going full Minnesotan.
Yes, I am. I don't think I will ever go Minnesota nice. I am still New York honest, but and direct. But yeah, I'm not letting the cold stop me. I know people always, warn against the seasonal affective disorder, and I just having that on top of COVID, on top of everything else, would just be too much. And I've been really lucky. I have one relative. I knew one person, one relative here, but then I have, my coworkers have just been so supportive. The job I got is at National Co-op Grocers. I am a category manager for frozen food and body care. So I get to work with about 200 co-ops all over the country. And the Twin Cities is really like the hub of co-ops. I mean, I think every time I tell someone I have this job, they're like, oh my God, the Wedge, Mississippi Market, Seward. Like, I love shopping there. And it's so nice to hear that reaction that people love their, these community establishments. And that's another surprise that I had coming here, was that things like independent stores and co-ops, not only in grocery, but in a lot of different industries, whether it's like your co-op hardware store or other things, are so prevalent here. And it just shows, it really reflects the culture and the vibe here that I haven't experienced in other places.
So have you always been somehow enmeshed in the food industry?
No, I've had a very circuitous career. Kind of all over the place. I think, if I were, not that this is an advice podcast, but if I were to give advice to a young adult, it would be like, don't worry if you can't figure out, what you want in the beginning, because you will figure it out. It'll all come together. And I was actually about 6 years ago, I was at a Moishe House retreat. For those who aren't familiar with Moishe House, it's houses all over the country for young adults to live in. And this retreat was to learn how to make your own retreat, your own Jewish retreat. Super meta.
Very.
Yeah. And I was always passionate about food and environment and ecology. And so my retreat was going to be on Jewish sustainability and food journeys. And we were at this retreat, we were doing a vision board. We were cutting out from magazines, and I opened a magazine, and there it is, an article about a food startup in the Bay Area in California that is making snacks out of the grain from brewing beer. So they're upcycling. And at the time, I was home brewing. I had a blog called Bakes and Brews. So it took these three passions I had of food, beer, and sustainability and wrapped it all into one. Of course, I contacted the brand right away. It turns out the founders went to Camp Tawanga and Camp Newman, which are two big Jewish camps in Northern California, and they went to UCLA. So we had a ton of mutual friends. And I just said, this is an awesome idea. I'm looking for a job. This is just really encompasses everything I'm about. And they were like, well, this article makes us look bigger than we are. But, keep checking in with us. And I just, kept the relationship going. It was helpful that obviously we had a lot of commonality. And when it was time for them to hire their first hire, I was a great fit. So And I had just moved up from LA to the Bay Area just because I loved the culture of the Bay at the time. And then them being there happened to all work out. So that is what introduced me to this industry of food, other than just kind of enjoying food. And that is what connected me then to the greater industry of the types of people that are encapsulated and encompassed in this industry, which are people who just want to feed each other. It's very similar to the culture of Judaism, of, of that hospitality. So, and there's a lot of Jews in food, which I definitely got into later in the Bay. There was a really cool organization called the Illuminati, the not so secret society of Jewish food professionals, and that encompassed people in the industry from both the packaged food side, which is what I was in, as well as the restaurant industry, anyone who was kind of, tangentially involved. And it was so nice to bring both of those affinity groups together, to really support each other. And I think that has kind of inspired me to the way that I have then created community and networks through, as I've moved to New York and now here in Minneapolis. And so I think that's, that one experience has really guided a lot of my future experiences as well.
So you mentioned Moishe House and this retreat for how to throw a retreat, but it seems like, and then you mentioned the JDC earlier with the trip to India, and it seems like you're finding all of these experiences in a Jewish space to get involved in past places where you've lived, and how important is it for you as you grow into your time in the Twin Cities to get yourself worked into the Jewish community here as well?
Yeah, so for me, it's very important. I would consider myself a camp Jew. Culturally very Jewish. It's a very big identifier for me, but I'm not somebody who's going to find my community at a synagogue necessarily. I'm someone who likes to create my own community. I like to host Shabbats through one table. I like to bring people into my own home and host. I like to meet people through more things where I can take a leadership position, or have a certain role in, or have some social impact type factor. So those are that's kind of the lens in which I approach building a Jewish community, is like, what am I adding value to rather than being more of a participant to? Mm-hmm. So actually, when I moved here, I started following different Instagram accounts for YALA Twin Cities, and there's a really great program through YALA, through the Federation, called 248. If anyone's familiar, it's a kind of like a program you apply for those Jewish leaders, doers, young adults, that can then hopefully come up with programming to then contribute to the Twin Cities community, as well as it's in partnership with our sister city Rehovot in Israel, as well as some Jews in Eastern Europe, in Hungary, and Poland and Russia, and some in London. I think we're also maybe partnering with some Argentinians. So we're really learning cross-culturally and sharing different experiences and different programming that we can then add value to our community. So I just saw that they were accepting applications when I moved here on Instagram, and I said, you know what? It's really hard during COVID. I am a single young adult. To meet friends in your mid-30s when you don't have those connections with a partner and a friend group, or your child's school, it's really difficult. I have experienced it in every place I move, and that is why I've been so in touch with the Jewish community in the ways I have, is because that is a primary way of building friendships and relationships. So I, joined that, and I'm so lucky that I was accepted. And it's, you know, me and five other wonderful women who are like super strong and awesome and have great ideas. And, it's, you think that like bonding over Zoom is could be difficult, and I think that there are times where it can be difficult and times where it just something clicks and it works. And we've kind of gotten to that point, and that makes me really excited for the future of when we can meet in person. That I feel like I've started gaining some ties and attachments and bonds to the Twin Cities, and hopefully that will lead to lots of exciting Shabbats and other events. I think that this community, being much smaller than all the communities I've been in, feels more tangible. I moved here, and I bought my car from, so my cousin is the cantor at Temple of Aaron, and then so he introduced me to uh, this Ben Saxon, who is from the Ford dealership at Emerald Grove.
Sure, we know Ben.
Yeah, and we get to talking. We're around the same age. I'm a little older. He's like, oh my God, you remind me of one of my friends that lives in New York. And, I'm like, oh, that's, not thinking that I would know that person. And like, 2 or 3 conversations later, I like, and going on, Jewish geography on Facebook, the girl he was talking about happens to be the one person that he knows in New York that I'm friends with.
Come on.
Yeah. And like, oh yeah, we had like a handful of mutual friends, and it's been really interesting. And he's been so, I mean, not to like plug Inver Grove Ford, but he has been so, he'll just like check in and just, because he knows that I moved here, and I don't know anyone, and like, how's it going? Same thing. I'm in the middle of buying a house. My realtor, I found him on Google, but his, last name was Edelstein. So I was like, member of the tribe.
Yep.
Sometimes it's just nice. Like, you kind of know that you have similar, values and thoughts. And, same thing. Like, every time I mention somebody, like somebody else in the community knows that person, or there's some kind of mutual connection, which in these bigger cities, you could say, oh, this person's Jewish. Do you know them? And like, there's, maybe a 25% chance. And like, here, it really feels like it's almost 100% chance.
Yeah, I think it's very different in trying to navigate a smaller Jewish community as a newcomer than a much larger one, especially if you're trying to find, your community. I think it can be a little bit easier here maybe than in other places. I think being a newcomer in Minnesota certainly has other challenges, but I do think that being a smaller community does have its strong suits.
Yeah, sure. And people have warned me that the people who have been friends forever at camps and whatnot might be a little cliquey, and but so far everyone has been very nice and welcoming, and I have not experienced that. And I'm coming in with an attitude of not expecting that, and I think part of that is always a good hurdle. I think that COVID has allowed that. If it wasn't COVID and I walked into a synagogue and I saw the cliques happening and I saw the people, I might be more weary of approaching. But that's not the case right now. So I think that there's kind of some nice silver linings that kind of pull those expectations apart a little bit.
For sure. So you mentioned YALA earlier, run by friend of Jewfolk, Emma Dunn, and she's planned this program coming up that you are a part of. It's coming up this coming Thursday, the 18th, called Eco-Munity. I hope I pronounced that right. I think Eco-Munity planting, buying, and eating sustainably. And once we will have, put this interview out, all three of the people on the panel will have been Who the Folk podcast guests. You're being joined by Ariel Kagan and Zachary Page. So I guess tell us a little bit about the program and what your role in it is.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Emma's great, and she approached me knowing a little bit of my background in the food industry, as well as the retreat that I had said I'd run, as well as I was also involved in the Great Big Jewish Food Fest over the summer, which was so fun, and kind of had this idea around how do we commemorate Tu B'Shvat? It's such a fun holiday that a lot of people don't really look at, but it's also so important and so trendy now. And so she asked me if I would want to be involved, if I had a topic to talk about. And in my retreat, we had a really great program and conversation around eco-kashrut. What does kosher, if we were to redo the laws of kosher, if we were to think about it in more modern standards and modern terms, would it look different than when it was created, centuries, millennia ago? We have a different, more global society. We have different practices in terms of, our farming practices, our large chicken farms and beef farm. What does it mean to buy local? What does it mean to buy regenerative? What does it mean to buy from your local neighbor or sustainably? Or and what is all this biohacking? What is the more like genetically modified, like an Impossible Burger type lab grown meat? If you lab grow a pig, well, then is that kosher? So I think that these are really interesting conversations to have around the topic, that I think being kosher a lot of times is very tied to how you grew up and to your experience around Judaism, what is forbidden, what is allowed. And I think expanding and broadening that definition allows people to approach the constructs of what kosher means and why it was created in the first place in a little bit of a better way.
I think there's some really fascinating questions that you brought up around that, and I think it'll be a really interesting discussion that you're going to be part of. So we're going to have the link to the Facebook event in the show notes and on the article page, and people can click and check it out and learn a little bit more. But I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it's a really interesting conversation to be had. And I think, more and more people are, I get the sense that at least people are trying to, at least live a little more sustainably, in some of the sort of more household products they buy. But I don't know if food is necessarily thought of in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the trend of plant-based, and I might be talking like being so in it every day, I might be talking from a certain bubble of understanding rather than mainstream.
You are definitely a little closer to the situation than most. That's true.
Absolutely. But plant-based is the biggest growing category by far. It's what's being invested in most. Even my parents, who, I never thought would ever go vegetarian or vegan, or they decided to become pescatarian January of 2020, and still over a year later have continued it today. And I would have never in my wildest dreams guessed that. So I think that it is becoming much more mainstream with a lot of the Netflix documentaries and others that are really harping on the impact not only to your health but to our environment. So I think it's something that is becoming more mainstream, having more mainstream awareness to the fact that these big farms and the methane that cows produce and what goes into these big manufacturing plants is so harmful, and how can we, from a day-to-day basis, make a difference. And in my opinion, I think it's something where not only from there's that ethical standpoint too, which values wise in Judaism is really important, is that it's something that's tangible, where I think recycling for so many years was such a um, like prioritization in terms of environmental and sustainable communication. But now a lot of information's coming out of well, China won't take our plastic, and what is actually really recyclable, what are different municipalities doing. There's a lot of not as much transparency around that topic, and I know I'm getting on my pedestal and getting a little too nitty gritty on this, but I think that more and more we will start seeing a focus on the food systems and sustainability.
And it's okay that you get on the pedestal and, it's a little into the weeds maybe, but also it ties very closely with what you do. I mean, not exactly, but it's sort of feels like in the same realm when it comes, at least sustainability in general.
Yeah.
It's definitely sort of the same ballpark. So we'll give you a pass. That's okay. Well, Sarah, last two questions, and we'll let you get on with your evening. But we certainly, and again, encourage people to check you and Ariel and Zachary out later this week, I should say, on the 18th for the event. So, Sarah, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Ooh, my favorite Jewish holiday is Passover. The last few years, minus this COVID year, which has been actually was very interesting to be able to participate with a larger swath of my family that normally wouldn't, I wouldn't have been maybe invited to my third cousin Seder, but now that it was, on Zoom, we could include a much larger group of people. I think that was lovely. But previous to that, the past few years, being in different cities and, maybe not being convenient to fly home just for the holidays, kind of creating my own orphan Passovers has been really nice. In San Francisco, I had, God, it was probably at least 25 people in my backyard. I was putting a fun twist on it. I did kind of an Asian theme. We had matzo ball soup and miso broth. We had poke instead of gefilte fish. I think that there's some great traditions in the food in Passover, and then there's some things that just may not appeal to everyone. And if you're gonna make a lovely meal and bring people together, it's always good if the food's also good and something to look forward to. So I think blending the tradition with the new has been a fun kind of, I've been able to play with that a little bit, and that's been really fun and exciting, and I can't wait to be able to do it again eventually soon.
Yeah, it'll be nice when we can do those things again, for sure. Yeah. And speaking of foods, what is your favorite Jewish food?
God, I have to say, this is the hardest question, and I've been asked this a lot recently. But can I say favorite Jewish food and then favorite Israeli food, I guess?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think my favorite Jewish food, I would say challah. It's so versatile. You can make French toast, you can make challah. There's so many different recipes. You can throw different seasonings into it. That's really fun, and it brings people together. Israeli, I recently made my own homemade crembo, which, if you're not familiar, it's called winter ice cream in Israel. They only serve it they only have it during the winter. It's
okay.
Made by the Strauss company. It's basically a cookie bottom with a marshmallow fluff filling, then dipped in chocolate. Other
Okay.
cultures and countries have them. It's called tea cakes in England. It's called besos in Peru. But they're very delicious, and obviously they don't transport very well. So they don't really
I would not think so. No.
they don't sell them here. So I made some homemade ones the other day, and it made me very happy.
How'd they turn out?
They turned out well. Yeah, I was very happy.
Well, that sounds delicious. Well, Sarah, Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated it and appreciated getting to know you. And I guess let us be, certainly not the first, but the latest to welcome you to the Twin Cities.
Thank you, Lonnie.
The Who the Folk podcast is a product of Jewfolk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for future guests, please send them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.